Okay, so here's a summary of the radio and the way it's set up. Firstly, I use S1 to adjust the thermal camber in flight, in float mode. I use S2 for expo. I use the T5 trim switch to adjust the elevator compensation for my brakes while flying. I use T6 to adjust the differential again for the ailerons. That can be done while flying. On the back, I use the left momentary switch for my launch mode on-off for DLG, and the right side calls the altitude at any time. My back switch turns on the altitude call at any time and calls every 15 seconds. This is my motor on, motor off. My middle switches are for aileron rates and elevator rates. If I come around to the front, my flight modes are here. My Vario sound on, sound off is there. And that's pretty much all of the switches that I use, apart from the trims while flying. Down here, I use these switches, function switches, to control timers and turn things on and off. So when we turn the radio on,
welcome to ETHOS. Check flight mode.
It tells me to check flight modes, which reminds me that it's in a dumb mode. Although the ailerons work, the rudder works, and the elevator works, there's none of the switch functions turned on. So we can have a very simple glider. Maybe my son wants to fly something simple and he can just fly it without worrying about how the switches will work. Now, if we have a quick look at the screen. So this main screen here is my DLG screen, which I fly quite a lot. It's got altitude and it's got its per flight timer and it's got a perpetual timer attached to it. If I go to the next screen, I've got a logging function for the DLG timer. We can read the altitude from the Vario and we can track the altitude live. I've got another screen which again calls out my vertical speed, or not calls out, reads out my vertical speed and my altitude. It tells me what my differential is currently set at, my brake compensation, and I can read the battery and the RSSI. Then the next screen is for a motor version of the glider. So it reads the altitude. It has a counter that counts down the time for battery usage and a perpetual flight time counter. So if we go back to the beginning and we look at some of the functions. So let's say we want to go slope soaring. So I can turn my slope soaring mode on.
Slope soarer mode. Aileron high. Elevator high.
And you can see that it called the rates. So we got aileron rates.
Aileron medium. Aileron high.
And elevator.
Elevator medium. Elevator high.
So slope soaring, yep, I might want rates depending on the wind conditions. And that might be all I need. So I've got my sticks and I've got my rates. Now, if I also decided I want to have some braking on the slope, I can
air brake on. Flaps up.
Turn the air brakes on.
Flaps down. Flaps up.
And we've got braking mode as well. Now, we've had a great time on the slope. We come down to the park. We think, oh, I might just want to add motor.
Motor armed.
So we have a motor, and now on our back switch, we can run the motor and on and off. So if we were in that other screen, for example, every time I pull the switch, it's counting down time. for the battery. And I can run a perpetual timer if I want. I can reset that. Now I can say, I've had enough of all that, I'm going to go home. So I can reset my radio.
Reset. Check flight mode.
And everything's back to simple mode again. Now, if we want to go into DLG flying, and let's say we've got our Varia, our receiver turned on, we're now reading the altitude, and I can reset reset the telemetry based on the ground level at the park. So with the DLG mode, I like to have
DLG mode.
my DLG mode on, which is launching.
Air brake.
I like to have
Flight
brakes,
off. Flight mode on.
and I like to have my
mode
flight
cruise.
modes. So essential flight modes,
Flight mode speed. Flight mode cruise. Flight mode float.
so I've got my three basic modes, and in float mode I've got some camber, and I can
Thermal camber.
-8.
Thermal camber.
-15.
Thermal camber.
0.
adjust the thermal camber while flying.
Expo 30%.
Change the Expo live, and
Flight mode cruise.
let's say I'm in cruise mode, want to go to launch. I push my button at the back,
Launch.
I release the button, now the glider's climbing,
Zoom.
and
Zoom.
I'm at
Zoom.
2 meters, I push over
Meters.
at the top of the launch, and the radio calls the altitude. Now, I can turn the Vario on and turn it off. And you might notice in the top here we've got a blinking light, which means that we are logging the flight time. So when I come into land,
Launch.
I've grabbed the glider, I'm in rotate mode,
Launch.
the
Launch.
logger is stopped, I launch, we're flying,
Zoom. Zoom.
we go up with our launch, we push over at the top,
2 meters.
and we're flying again. And at any time, if I want to land, say, I've caught my glider, I can also turn the timer off here. And when I turn that timer off, it also resets the log. And if we go forward to that next screen, we can see the altitude. We can see the logging of each flight, and we can see the telemetry as we're going. Now I've got it set quite fine because it's set to 0 to 150 meters, and we're only moving a small amount. But that's basically tracking the altitude. And when it logs, when we stop between logs, this timer also stops. So it really only tracks when the glider's in the air. Let me turn the noise off. Now, because we've got our Vario on, we've got this screen that shows the vertical speed, current altitude, what my differential is, and I'm finding that it's not flying very well.
Aileron differential.
5%.
Aileron differential.
10%.
So I've reduced the lower position of the left aileron side by 10%. Got my brakes.
Flaps down.
Currently, if I was in full braking mode, my elevator curve maximum is 10% compensation. And I can
Air brake. Elevator.
11%.
Air brake. Elevator.
12%.
tweak that a little bit if I'm not happy.
Air brake. Elevator.
11%.
Air brake. Elevator.
10%.
And so essentially, that's it. I've got switching here to turn off and on certain modes for certain kinds of flying. And that suits me very well.